the best is yet to come. Everybody knows about our Premier Vanderzalm. If you don't know, I will tell you about Premier Vanderzalm and how you're going to protect your commission, because Vanderzalm was the Premier. I received in March a voice message directly from the Premier, and I said to my husband and son, why is the Premier himself calling me? Why is he's leaving a message for me to call his wife? Because I say Premier doesn't usually call himself. It's always by a secretary or an assistant. So the second message came also from the Premier directly himself. Okay, so I returned the phone call, and he said that he wanted me to see his wife Lillian about his fantasy garden, his property in Chilliwack, in Surrey, the 57-acre, 7.4 acre that I'm telling Dixon to see if he can resell it now. But however, it turned out that instead of dealing with his wife, which he asked me to go and see, which I did, she lined it all up on their coffee table. They live at the Fantasy Garden on number 4 Road and Steveden Highway in a little dinky apartment of 600 square foot at the end of the castle apartment. He said to me, he had a lot of realtors try to sell the Fantasy Garden before he called me. And that was Bob Lee, Jeff Lowy, and so forth, so forth. It was difficult because he had so many lawsuits against him at the tenants of the Fantasy Garden. He was in default of 3 mortgages. I said to him, let's go and see what your finance situation is. Your first mortgage is with CIBC. CIBC is also the bank of the BC government. If the government was not dealing with CIBC, CIBC would have forced him into bankruptcy because he was so behind on his mortgage. So I said, okay, I'll draw a special business plan that is suitable to sell the Fantasy Garden, that is able to sell the Fantasy Garden. If I sell it for $16 million, and I put $16 million in your pocket, and I ask the syndication of Taiwan Group, who I am very familiar with because I opened the Taiwan market in 1984. I stayed in Taiwan back and forth and coordinated with the friends over there, including Choi Hung of the Fortune Hotel for the Taiwan Olympic. So in 1984, I stayed there. So when I went back there in 1990 for Vanderzalm, I said, okay, this business plan is feasible. The syndication fees, including the commission, is $2 million. The syndication of financing. I went to CIBC and I asked Vanderzalm to come with me, which he was scared to. He won't go. I went and saw CIBC Vice President, Mr. Pollitt. Mr. Pollitt, he is so behind. I'm going to do this syndication and this business plan and to sell this Fantasy Garden. I have several people from Taiwan and that I could put it together. I host in my home cocktail buffet for part of the group that came over from Taiwan. Gee, they used to tell me how much they can put cash in their briefcase. Did you know $87,000 US will fill one briefcase cash? I can tell you all kinds of funny stories, but it's too long and too interesting that I get a kick out of it myself. I laugh myself when it kept flowing out of my mind. So ended up CIBC gave me letters of recommending me of this plan that I had prepared for the Premier Vanderzalm in his Dairy Street. I got a letter from CIBC for Singapore, for Philippines, for Hong Kong and for Taiwan to finance if I needed to, which I didn't. So the business plan worked. I brought them over. Mr. Tan Yu, the billionaire, he was the richest private company in China or Taiwan, Southeast Asia for that matter, because he's originally from Philippines, and he lived in Taiwan. And they own banks and hotels and malls and so forth. And we were going to open a bank in Canada, affiliated bank of his Asia World enterprise. So the premier surprised me. Well, after all, he's a premier. He's the head of British Columbia. Who am I to question that he is dealing with me directly, not his wife, that is supposed to be. When he became the leader of the social credit in 1986 at Whistler, he declared all his asset is going into blank trust, which is important for all government officials. When they become a government official, all their asset goes into blind trust. And he announced that his blind trust was his wife, Lillian. And he was going to use his premiership to promote Fantasy Garden. So Fantasy Garden he did. He had all the government function at Fantasy Garden because it was huge. It's 25-acre, beautiful gardens and observatory, banquets, and just beautiful. It's actually a national treasure. It was so beautifully constructed. Unfortunately, he runs into financial difficulty that all his premier's payment goes to Fantasy Garden. So he was in a tough time. When I came along, I worked with him directly, which I was shocked because it was only me, the premier, and the billionaire, three of us. My husband, Dean, was very protective and loving. He would sometimes accompany me by driving me to Fantasy Garden. Other than that, just that. So when Tan Yu came, and I carried, my husband carried in his briefcase the cash. And we checked in at the Western Bayshore. He gave me his cash or his envelopes to open a safety deposit box. Now, this is the famous area that you all heard about and read about and want to know the real story, because the Chinese never had put out the real story. The real story as it really happened. So Vanderzalm came up to the hotel at the Bayshore, and in our suite, we were closing the Fantasy Garden deal. On the Fantasy Garden deal, there's a note for the syndication of $2 million for Taiwan Group, including the commission, 1.5. Fantasy Garden was $16 million. He asked me to change it to US dollar because at that time, Maloney was the prime minister. I was having the Meech Accord. And the Meech Accord, he had to fly into Ottawa regarding that, and that's going to be US dollar. The Canadian dollar is going to be going down pretty low. And I believe it went down to 35% against the US dollar. So $1 would only give us less $35. So we changed that interim at the hotel. There was a dinner waiting for us at the Imperial restaurant. We couldn't go because we were closing this deal. It was a long, hard deal to close. I said, this is the note that you sign for the syndications, fees, and the commission. When we close it, you have to pay it. But he says, okay, talk to Taiwan and see if we can do it less. I went to the telephone in the hotel, which is about 20 feet away from him. The note sat on the table. I always remember that. I called Taiwan while he's sitting there, and all the rest were sitting alongside, including his wife on the bed, because she couldn't be bothered. It was his job. which it certainly should have been hers. So when I came back, and I says, okay, they can reduce it, the syndication cost. The $2 million note's gone. Hey, what happened to the $2 million box? Is it in your pocket? Not on the floor, not in the garbage. Dirty bugger. He took that note and hid it. Maybe it's in his pocket. I couldn't search his pocket. So Taiwan says, well, then if he did that, let's keep it. Let's get that. Everybody has to be paid. The commission had to be paid. The syndication fees for the financing has to be paid. So we ended up that I got him to sign for $1.5 million, with $500,000 going to the syndication, $1 million to our share commission with our corporations and our sales. It was signed and sealed. Then he asked, Tanyu, you have a brown envelope that you brought all that cash because Tanyu was going to buy the Hilton Airport in Los Angeles. That's what the cash was for. So Tanyu says, Faye, go down to the safety deposit box and bring that brown envelope up. Because when I opened the box, I gave Tanyu the key. He says, no, you carry it, because he trusted me and my husband immensely. I brought the brown envelope back to the hotel room. Tanyu says to my husband, Leung, Dean Leung, count it. Dean counted the US dollar in $1,000 stack on the coffee table at the hotel room 1980, underneath the floor where Howard Hughes lived, that famous. So between Howard Hughes and Tanyu and me and Premier Vanderzalm made history for the Western Bayshore Inn Hotel that is everlasting. Dean counted it, $20,000 stack of $1,000 bill. Dean says, Bill, here it is. You count it. Tanyu says, count it. Bill counted the stack of $1,000 stack, scoop it up, put it in his pocket. That is the real story that the whole city or the whole province and Hong Kong was talking about. The famous brown envelope of $20,000 the premier had pocketed. But when he was questioned by the opposition at that time was led by Harcourt, Glenn Clark, and Sohoda. He says, oh, that money was for me to buy a jet and some furniture to send to Taiwan. His accountant by that time entered the picture. At that time, well, be four of us. His accountant, I believe it was Peak and Maverick at that time before the merge, the premier, billionaire Tanyu, and myself. His closing of statement for the Fantasy Garden shows $20,000 went to his trip to California and went to him buying his clothes. So who's telling the real story? The worst of all, when it was closed, and it was supposed to be announced on September the 7th of 1990 in the International Suite at Bayshore, Western Bayshore Inn, for the media to announce. He didn't dare to announce himself then because, after all, he's a premier. He's supposed to be a national blind trust. So it was announced that the Fantasy Garden is sold. And we went down. It was supposed to be a luncheon for the media and ourselves. Went back to the hotel room. The deal collapsed. The deal collapses because two lawyers, Alexander Lang and Bodine, they neglect to apply for the Canadian government approval for foreign investment over X number of dollars. Because you have to declare and get the approval from the national government for foreign ownership. So the deal collapsed in the hotel room. The lawyers will start walking out. And I says, come back. There is also a way. If it collapsed today, how could Vanderzalm carry on and all the interest and tenure and all that while you approve for Canada investment? Let's make a deal now. Possession today. All the incoming and outgoing expenses goes to the new owner and to be debit and credit upon approval of the national government foreign investment deal. In harsh negotiation, I did close it that day to save the deal. So in the meantime, being announced that it's been sold, and the opposition start to ask what happened, why a month later it is not registered. Ask the Premier. The Premier was very, very, what do you say, sarcastic or obnoxious. He says to the media, none of your business. So the media got cross at Vanderzalm, and they went digging. They went digging why it was not registered by the end of September as it says it was, and it's still outstanding. All he had to say instead of none of your business was that because we needed the government foreign approval. That became a political football, a political circus. They found out that Vanderzalm never gave the blind trust as he has to do by law. He was in breach of contract, breach of public office, conflict of interest, because he was himself dealing on this deal. Opposition and the public start to outcry. We want a public inquiry. The public inquiry finally went on by Commissioner Ted Hughes, who was the former Attorney General of Saskatchewan. We were all under oath. And when you see, when I have a chance to publish this book, my title is, you probably always heard of, It Ain't Over to the Fat Lady Sing. And I'm not too far from fats, but my title will be The Hat Lady Sings. Premier Vanderzalm, Billionaire Tanu, Fantasy Garden. This thick of the document that the government prosecutor had put together, each page was side by side, back to back, handwritten letter between me and the Premier, under oath at the Ted Hughes inquiry of the document. He cannot deny, he cannot sue anybody. It's false because it was our own handwriting the whole year, every day, back to back. When I was in Taiwan, how it is, what it is. Vanderzalm used the government office, his picture signed Premier of British Columbia. The government gives the government Premier pin, the government information as a gimmick to sell Fantasy Garden. But he made me pay for admission to the Fantasy Garden when I brought Mike Mercado to do the video of the sale and to buy the flowerful placemat and all those various promotions or sale at the gift shop to take to Taiwan. Honestly, I can't believe it. However, out of all that, the Hughes inquiry found that he conflict of interest. So the core conflict interest, breach of public office, breach of trust. 10 minutes after the Ted Hughes inquiry came out, Vanderzalm immediately, the first premier in the Commonwealth, in disgrace, resigned. And the court charged him for the conflict of interest and breach of trust and breach of government office. At the trial, the outcome, the head, Honorable Mr. Justice Campbell wrote in his declarations of Vanderzalm is conflict of interest, stupid of breach of public office, breach of trust, but not guilty. So he got a slap on the wrist. And that came out on the front page of the magazine, Maclean magazine. My husband told me to frame it because any little petty shoplifter would have been sent to jail or fined, but not Premier Vanderzalm, because Premier boasts that I, Premier of British Columbia, are the boss of all those judges, all those lawyers, also David Lam, the Lieutenant Governor. He made David Lam, then the Lieutenant Governor, to host a luncheon in the government house in Victoria for Tanu and our entourage and me, so that impress Tanu of his government authority. When I arrived at the government house, David Lam is an old friend of mine. He and his wife never ceased to thank Dean and I for getting him into real estate, getting into his house on Ash Street by Cambie, and getting his kids at the Sir Winston Churchill School until they pass away. I says, David, here I am at the government house in Victoria. You're hosting the luncheon for the Premier of British Columbia and the billionaire and myself. What am I supposed to address you now? Your Excellency, Your Honor, because you're a Lieutenant Governor. He says, Faye, come on. You just call me, hey, you. So ever since then, he says, just call me, hey, you. So that's the Lieutenant Government good friend. And at that luncheon, Tanu was busy writing out the report of Fantasy Garden, send it back to Taiwan, to Hong Kong, to his public company, to increase his stock to go sky high, because he just brought the Fantasy Garden in Richmond, in Greater Vancouver, Richmond, but from the Premier of Vanderzalm. So the story is so enormously. Then it comes to my commission. Where is it? It's supposed to be in the trust account of the lawyer of Alexander Lang. Bodine was the lawyer. Premier Vanderzalm says, I'm the Premier. I'm the boss. I license you lawyer. So I have a right to take that commission out of your trust account, give it to me to hold in trust. He took the commission as his trustee in trust, which is negligent and unprofessional for the lawyer office. And Premier Vanderzalm had no right to do that. You all in real estate knows this is wrong, unprofessional and wrongdoing, but they did. So to this day, if you go and collect that $1 million, I'll donate the 90% to wherever you want, and you can keep the 10%, because he still owe it. And under the trust agreement, in trust, there's no time limit. So Vanderzalm pocketed that $1 million commission because he was the Premier and Alexander Lang lawyers was negligent, unprofessional, has given it to the Premier when it should go to us for distribution. That's how, what you call, politically maneuver, or what you call, the big guy says to you little guys, I can do what I want, and the X with you. So you got to remember, when I have it all signed. I was just going to say, you remember, do you get everything all signed? I have everything all signed and sealed. I have his signature. One particular letter, I was always laugh. He wrote it out, and then he says in the closing, Lillian sends your love. I'll show it to you. And sign Lillian, when you know darn well he wrote it. So how could you say Lillian sends your love when you're writing it and sign Vanderzalm? Simply because he was trying to avoid that he was dealing it directly himself. But he did. So it went on to all kinds of a crazy circus that the Chinese newspaper never, ever have given the right information. It's always manufactured information and fabricated information. This is why the public has been demanding me for my book. Why did the Premier of Vanderzalm have private chat with FAYE Leung on Fantasy Garden? And I was so respectful, as I always am, on the office of the official. That's why I always have good friends in the government, because I'm respectful of their office and their position and their person. I did not say, without being asked a question, I did not talk about why, what, and how unless the Ted Hughes inquiry asked me or the lawyer asked me. That's why I never divulge that he's really in conflict of interest. He wrote letters to Philippines. He wrote letters to Irvine, California about Tanyu and his deal to do this and giving instructions. He wrote all kinds of things that was conflict of interest and breach of office. I saved his face because of being respectful, which I shouldn't have, because after all, why should I? But I did, out of respect. So today, I did not get 1 cent, but the worst of it all was that I paid $78,125 US dollar back in 1990 when the US dollar was 30 cents to a dollar of US dollar. I lent that to him. He said to me, he said to my husband, Dean, and I, my grandchildren, my son and daughter, my wife and I will be forever grateful if you go with FAYE to Taiwan, because you know the Coonies there. You go with FAYE and close the deal. I'm forever grateful. And when you lend me this money, which he needed so badly, he never paid us a cent at all to this day. That my husband said, this is our reserve emergency fund. This is FAYE emergency fund, my funeral fund, and my son's tuition fund. The moment FAYE put $16 million in your pocket, you pay it back, which we did. Signed and sealed by Vanderzalm, hereby agree. No, he ate that up. We did not have a penny back from what we lent him. So that's a big lesson for you to remember. When you're dealing with some people, you have to take the caution, even you trust them in their position, in their deal, how it can end up to where I am today. So this is why I'm still working long hours for my own fighting, because Vanderzalm eaten me up. And he created and fabricated all the stories thereafter, which is too long. It's larger than a boat of material to tell you, but that gives you the gist of really how it happened. So there's no commission, no expense paid. I paid all the expenses, all the airfare, all the difficulty, because I was too darn good-hearted and trustworthy. My doctor says this is now 2016. You better not trust everybody, which I do. So you realtor there, when you're selling, whether it's a $16 million commission project, no, sorry, $1 million commission for a $16 million project, or a $100 project. Watch who you're dealing with. Listen, even sign and seal with witnesses. It can go into a terrible situation, as it happened to me. And it's there. I have all, whatever I say today or any time, I have the proof, I have the material, I have the photographs, I have the letters. It's so important that these are preserved for posterity, because it's part and parcel of the Canadian, of the city, of the province heritage. To keep it as an inspiration for the next generation knowledge, for the public knowledge of the masses of immigration. At first, as I was talking about immigration, I talked about in 1964, when I came back from Hong Kong, which I represent Hang Seng Bank here in Canada until 1970. I went with Jack Nicholson, then Minister of Immigration, which was Lieutenant Governor thereafter, to legislate a business investment program and business people. In other words, prior to 1964, the immigration policy is only relative, blood relations of the Chinese here, pioneer, with children under 18, fought to age 19, then to 25 before they can apply to come to Canada with their wives, because the Chinese were not allowed to bring their family since 1923. So after I did the Hang Seng Bank and Hong Kong Bank correspondent with Canada Trust, I found out that they are those that want to come in business class. Skill, professional, were not allowed. And that's when I went to work, just patriotically for the Chinese and for the community. Nothing to do with me. I wasn't bringing anybody here. So we worked on it, and we got the white paper proof and legislated the business and skill and labor program in 1967. And that's when Hong Kong people witnessed the China Liberation Army walked in and marched in China. So that frightened the Hong Kong people. Then that's why they all start application to come to Canada. And that was 1967, 66, 67. So the first batch of millionaires and business people from Hong Kong arrived. My home was Grand Central Station. Like, for example, R.C. Yong, Che Bing-wing, Shaw family, doctors, Yu Guok-ding, like David Lam, Lam Shu-chai, Ho Tim, all those. I can show you the pictures. My family then was 3 of us for dinner, but I'm always cooking and nursemaid and drivers and chauffeur for 14 people for dinner every day, and host a whole bunch of banquets, just of good heart as a realtor. And now then, I'll give you one story that you got to watch. Just because you're good to them, that doesn't mean that they're going to give you back 5 cents for coffee. I showed them a piece of duplex on the corner, one of them, that's the Shaw family. That's Robert Shaw. He's now sitting around in nightclub here. On the corner of 49th and Cambie, that duplex on the corner. It was snowstorm. And Robert knocked on my door a year before Thanksgiving. Says he was staying at the Y covering his eyes to take a shower because it was such a broken, and he only had apple pie for the weekend. Well, I bring him in because his parents is coming. Okay, for the weekend. He stayed a whole year, and I have to rush home every day from my business and my entertainment, cook for him a steak and corn every day before I go to my activity. And he enrolled with my son's school at Winston Churchill. His grandfather, Run Shaw's brother, sends $10,000 a month for him to pay for his school fee. So what he does, he go to Winston Churchill, he applied for 16-year-old milk credit and bought his own car with the money and lived free room and board in my house. So when the parents did arrive, I show him the duplex at 49th and Cambie. That is close to Winston Churchill. So what did they do? They circumvent me. They went to another, they said, oh, I can buy both of them by another guy. Well, I said, that's a duplex. It's supposed to be 2 housing. So you see, you have to watch these guys. They're crooks. They're canny. Well, that's another story another time. But however, being in sales, you are being circumvented all the time. The latest for your information that I'm circumvented with my good friend, petroleum engineer Gary Vanderzalm and Mrs. Ng. In 2008 and 2006, I worked toward with CNOC and Sinopec and CNPC, China National Petrol Corporation, the largest 3 company of China in oil and gas. So CNOC that bought Alberta Nexum, Nexum, which you read about now, for $15 billion. He signed and sealed, and I have the pictures and the documents signed and sealed in my hotel room at the Great Wall of China in Beijing. 15 billion with 140 million of commission belonging to their groups of corrupted officials. In 2008, we signed and sealed it, and we bought the Nexus detail to China. It was bought and approved by the government of Canada a year and a half ago. So China, CNOC, China National Overseas Dwelling Corporation, owns it now and circumvented us, that my friend is trying to declare to the government of the corrupted officers. I have no hope of receiving it, but I'm telling you this because you're in sale. You have to be cautious. You have to be careful what you're doing, who you're dealing with. Even you trust them and you believe in them patriotically or friendly or respectful. So, stories of that happen, and I would skip the immigration about doing with Nicholson on 64 that the business people can come. Then on 1966, I got the caregiver, the nanny approved, because they all have servants and they couldn't bring them when those business people came. And the nurses, it's all on record. I've done that with Nicholson. Then, in 79, Lloyd Axworthy, I said to him, how about the entrepreneur program, the enterprise program, to let these people come, besides skilled professional and business people and no blood relation, but also of able to be here to be in business. Entrepreneur, enterprises, and immigration investment program. That was 1979. Lloyd Axworthy was the Minister of Immigration at that time. And he said he need to sell the 10 provinces in Canada before they can legislate these programs. He used my paper, my application, my report to sell to 10 provinces so that this program can be legislated. That is how it started, and that's how today there is masses of immigrants, masses of billions of dollars here. I worked with them on it only patriotically for you folks, for the people, for the immigrant. I don't know. We sacrifice our time, our family time to do it, but we done it, and I'm proud that so many immigrants are here today under those programs, and immigrant consultants are approving it. So now you have caregiver, you have nannies, you have business people, skilled professionals, entrepreneur, immigration investment program. All that has been legislated, and I did that from 1964 to 1980 with 4 limit immigration officers. So that is, in a nutshell, a little bit of a story of what happened here as it happened. The life and times, the heart and soul, the woven, the gold fabric, inlaid with black thread as it happened here. And that's all I can tell you now, because I've used a lot of your time already, and I thank you all for being so patient and hear me yicky, yacky, yacky all the time, and the premier. So if you go and collect the premier's money, you take it. It's all for you, because I doubt it. I can take it, but I do have the papers. I do have his signed agreement. So thank you one and all for your kindness, and thank you so much to hear me tell a little bit of life as it was, and especially thank you to Dixon Tang for your greatness and your wonderful leadership, to leader of the leader, to make stories happen, be told for the generation, and leave it for the next generation to know what life is about to us local pioneer at that time. Then I want to thank Elvin C., who did this beautiful video, and a very wonderful webcaster and videographer, and a good friend that did my website for free, Andrew Fong, I call him the Doctor Mechanic, and John Barbarian, Gary Lee, Juliet Ho, Michael Chang, Danny, and HSBC banker. Kenneth Kong, I have to show you the seat I paid. Did you know that your bank went and came to Canada to buy the bank of VC through Bahama to save $200 million tax?
Also, thanks Katie.
Katie, Danny, Michael, Yvonne, everybody, each and every one, thanks a lot with all my heart. Heartfelt appreciation. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.
好多謝各位來臨，很謝謝各位來臨，這票真的講得很清楚，很精彩。
亂七八糟，不好意思啊。
亂七八糟是我們的榮譽，就是他的故事實在感人。做一個地產經濟最重要一句話，有良心。
有良心。
有良心，你永遠就走得遠，不怕的。We are realtor. We work in hard, right? No matter how hard we have to struggle by ourselves. I wish everybody Happy New Year and prosperity year to come. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Don't let it get down. Whenever you're down, stay up.
I won't get down. Look at me.
You never get down. You're the leader.
Hey, Andrew. Okay, thank you.